Hello, in this video I'll be discussing my philosophical breakdown of parsha Vayechi and how it influenced my yoga class sequence this week. You can find a transcript of this video on the blog. The link is in the bio, and that's also where you can find the class video. And you can subscribe to my mailing list for exclusive video content describing the physical breakdowns of each of my classes. Please remember to like, subscribe, and feel free to drop a comment if you've got any questions or feedback. So without further ado, my Vayechi takeaway. So after 17 years in Egypt, Jacob knows he's getting old and he asks Joseph to remove his body from Egypt for burial. Joseph agrees. Jacob knows that his final request may require cautious conduct to secure Pharaoh's consent, so he sits up and more adamantly asks Joseph to take an oath to actually do this, that he will bury him in the Holy Land. He fears that his grave will become an object of idolatry in Egypt, so Joseph promises. Next, Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, who were able to remain faithful to their family's morals despite being born and raised in Egypt. This blessing elevates them to the status of Joseph and all of his brothers. Then Jacob dies. A large funeral procession to the Holy Land where he's buried, and Joseph also dies and had previously instructed that his bones be taken out of Egypt for burial as well. So let's take a look back on Joseph's life. He had the first 17 years of his life with his father in their homeland. Then, after everything he'd been through, he had his father's last 17 years of his life with him in Egypt. I can only imagine that he had been looking forward to seeing his father again for his entire life. But in a way, Joseph had a new father in Egypt, the Pharaoh. Even though the Pharaoh had been a paramount figure in the family's survival through the famine and beyond, Jacob tests his son's dedication by having him take an oath to bury him in the Holy Land, no matter how difficult it may be. So for the interpretive movement in this week's class, I pull inspiration from Joseph's experience in Egypt, having both the Pharaoh and his father together with likely differing expectations. I represent this imagery of trying to combine his family life and the role with the Pharaoh through the use of the eagle arms and the gold-posted arms. Like two different fathers, but he's trying to, combine them into one life for himself. Jacob's end-of-life request to be buried in the Holy Land instead of Egypt starts out with just an initial request, but he asks again more intensely for Joseph to promise. I represent this imagery during the movements in the main flow. So the poses and movements progress from having like 3 points of contact to either being balancing poses or just having like 1 or 2 points of contact. Then the first yin posture represents when Jacob blesses Joseph's sons. That's what the arms cross, because he blesses them with his arms crossed. And even though Jacob tries to uncross his arms, he keeps them crossed and crosses them again to bless the sons. So the next yin pose represents the grandiose nature of Jacob's funeral procession, where he's kind of laying on the back and I've got the block propping yourself up. And then Shavasana represents the end of Joseph's life and the end of the first book of the Torah, Genesis. Also, Shavasana just allows you to absorb the physical benefits of the practice as well anyway. So even though the family was settled in a land devoid of morals, they maintained a high level of spirituality and character. So how does one know if a fish is healthy? It can swim upstream against the tide of society, and that's exactly what happens with these generations of Joseph and his father, grandfather, great-grandfather, all the way up to Abraham. There's definitely a lot of stress and grief in this week's parsha with Jacob's death, Joseph's death, and just the stress of having to secure the okay to be buried in the Holy Land and not in Egypt, even though they're within the Pharaoh's palace. It's just kind of strange. You wouldn't think it's normal if the Queen of Egypt wanted to be buried in, I don't know, somewhere in Africa. It just wouldn't make sense. But this is kind of what happens. So Often this kind of like stress and grief can physically manifest itself in having like a weak chest, their chest caves, and that kind of forces this overstretching of the scapula. So they can't really glide properly. You can't really breathe properly either when your posture is not right. So I also focus on the lung meridian, just kind of strengthening that whole line and the chest open, the scapula gliding properly. So that's this week's focus. Yeah, and for the discussion of the physical benefits of this week's Lit Style yoga practice, you need to go to my website and subscribe to my mailing list. So the link is in the bio for that. Thank you very much. Please remember to like and subscribe, and go to the blog if you enjoy these videos. So thanks.